Alright, in this project we're going to be talking about how to receive user input from a keyboard. We'll start this off by creating a new project. We'll call it user input. We'll add a new class. Call it user input as well. The first thing we're going to do is import a package. This package is the java.util.Scanner package. Packages in the Java programming languages are pretty much added on toolboxes. So for instance, in this tutorial, like I said, we're going to learn how to accept user input from the keyboard. So in order to use the specific functions and classes that we need to accept user input from the keyboard, we need an extra toolbox. And that toolbox is the package that we just imported, java.util.Scanner. The first thing we're going to do is create a new variable. This variable is going to be of string type. Now we haven't talked about variables of the string type yet, but for the purpose of this tutorial, you're not going to need an in-depth overview of a string variable. For now, just know that a string variable is a non-primitive data type. Previously, we talked about primitive data types. This is a non-primitive data type. We'll go ahead and create this variable and we'll call it name. And this would be the procedure of declaring a variable of the string type. You set it equal to new, space, string, and then parentheses, you would put what you want the initial value to be. For now, we'll just go ahead and leave it blank. We'll go ahead and put a print statement, and we will go ahead and print out what is your name. This next line here is where the package that we imported comes in handy. So what we need to do is create an object that is able to accept input from a keyboard. And the way we do that is we create a new object of the scanner class, and we are going to call this object input. Similarly to when we initialize the string variable, the way we initialize this input object is by typing out new space scanner, being that scanner is the object type. And then inside of the parentheses here, we're going to put what kind of scanner we want. And we want something to accept input. So the way we do that is we'll put system.in inside of the parentheses here. After we do that, we now have an object that will allow us to accept the input from the keyboard. So going back to underneath the print statement that we created, if we want to set a variable equal to the input that we accept from the user, we can just go ahead and set name equal to input, which is the name of the object we created. And if we put a period, we could see the functions that are available to us for this scanner object. The one we are going to use is next. And if we read what this preview window here says, it finds and returns the next complete token from the scanner. When we run the program, you have a better idea of what that does. Next here, what we're going to do is put a print line statement, and we're going to print out the value that was stored inside of that name variable. If we run the program here, we are prompted, what is your name? And then it's going to wait for us to input something from the keyboard. That's what that input.next did. If we type a name here, we'll go ahead and put Bob. It's going to take Bob, store it inside of the name variable, and then it's going to print out hello plus the name variable, which has the value Bob stored inside of it. The last thing you want to do is close your scanner object. If you don't do this, Eclipse is going to throw a warning at you. Your program will still run if you don't do this, but it's good practice to always close these scanner objects once you're done using them. Alright, now going back to our last tutorial, we created an application that was able to give us our y-intercept when we were giving it x and y coordinate as well as a slope. Using the scanner class, we're able to create more of an interactive program where a user can input any values, any slope, and a y-intercept can be found. We'll go ahead and create a program that does that here. We'll leave the scanner object input here because we're going to need it for this project. And we'll go ahead and create our three variables that are needed for this program. Our x coordinate, our y coordinate, and our m value, which is our slope. Once again, we'll go ahead and put a print statement here, and we'll ask the user to enter a x coordinate. Once again, in order to receive the input from the keyboard, we'll go ahead and set x equal to input dot. Now it's not going to be next. The reason why we used next in the previous example was because we were looking for a string. The default next looks for a string. What we're looking for here is an int value. So we put next int. It pretty much functions the same as .next, except it's going to look for an integer value instead of a string. Once we accept that x coordinate, we'll ask for the y coordinate. In the same manner, we'll put y equal to input.nextInt. Similarly, we'll do the same for the slope. Now reviewing, we know that slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. And in order to retrieve that b value, which is the y-intercept, what we are looking for, we need to set everything else equal to it. Basic algebra. So our y-intercept can be found by multiplying our m and our x values and subtracting it from our y value. So we'll go ahead and create a variable that equals exactly this. And after we create that variable, we could go ahead and print out what the y-intercept is. And if we run this program here, you could see it's going to ask us to put in an x coordinate. It's going to ask us to put in a y coordinate as well as our slope. And it's going to tell us the y-intercept for a point at 3, 2 with the slope of 1 is -1. Okay, now let's look at one last example. Once again, we're going to go ahead and use the scanner object input on top. And for this project, we're going to create a program that will tell us our average speed on a trip. We'll start it off by creating a print statement that asks the user how many miles they traveled. And we'll go ahead and set up a float variable called miles that will store a value that the user inputs. And then we'll create another print statement that asks the user how long it took them to travel that distance. Notice we're using float variables here, and that's so the user can enter fractional numbers. This will allow us to achieve a more accurate result. Next, we'll create a float variable called mph, and this will be our actual average speed. And the way we calculate this is by dividing the total amount of miles traveled by the total amount of time it took to travel that distance. And once we do that, we could go ahead and create a print line statement that prints out what our average speed was. So if we run this program, it's going to ask us how many miles we traveled. We'll go ahead and put 180. It's going to say, how long did it take you to travel 180 miles? I'm going to put the number 3 for 3 hours. And as you can see, our average speed of the trip was 60 miles per hour. Let's try this with some fractional numbers. We'll put 142.213 miles traveled, and it took us 4.81 hours to travel. So our average speed was about 29.57 miles per hour. So as you can see, by using the scanner package, you are able to create an interactive program that accepts input from a user.